High desert noon. Heat shimmers above the hardpan like a veil, and yet the air feels colder than a truth no one wants to touch. The street runs straight as a withheld breath. Boards creak on the porch of the mercantile. A sign taps softly against a nail. Counting seconds, the town pretends not to hear. Wind noses the dust, then stills, as if listening for permission. Far off, a dog barks once and thinks better of it. This is a place that survives by routine. Hands to work, eyes to ground, hearts kept small to fit inside the ribs. She stands by the water pump, not drinking. Her palms are raw from scrubbing the iron handle that doesn't need it, from polishing the only thing that will not ask her to leave. The bucket beside her is full and untouched, a small round mirror refusing to show a face. She works the rag in a slow circle, then another, the motion that keeps panic from sharpening its teeth. When shame teaches a child to be quiet, the body learns to move instead of speak. When a home closes its door, the nervous system makes a smaller home in the hands. She breathes shallow and steady, like someone keeping watch over her own pulse. The dust clings to her skirt, to the bare skin at her wrist, where a bracelet might have rested in a kinder story. Across the way, a bay gelding waits outside the saloon, tethered to a rail silvered by years of rain and fingers. The horse shifts its weight as if the ground has a secret. He lifts one hoof and sets it down again, tail whisking at flies that know what hunger is. Leather creaks. A ring in the bit ticks against his teeth. The animal senses what people deny. Pressure in the air, a change that isn't wind. Creatures don't argue with weather, or with the ache inside a room. They feel and they adjust. The body believes before the mind agrees. Eyes slide to the girl and then away, quick as a match struck and pinched out. A man spits and misses the crack between the boards. A woman pauses with a loaf under her arm, then remembers there is nothing she can safely remember. No one says her name because half the town never asked, and the other half learned it only to bend it. Mestiza, as if one word could carry a map of what is allowed and what is not. If a soul had color, hers would be the shade of river water in drought, brown, clear, alive, and often mistaken for mud. She knows this, not in her head, but under her ribs, where old fear builds a nest. She keeps her gaze fixed on the pump's iron throat and tries to make herself useful to an object. Usefulness is the oldest door left unlocked. There are children somewhere behind the curtains, testing whispered dares. There are men inside the saloon rehearsing their laughter so it sounds like truth. In the back room of the general store, tongues sharpen rumor into a blade. Her mother this, her father that, a story that keeps changing clothes so it can pass as fact. The town talks because talk is cheaper than mercy. Silence would force them to feel the weight of their own looking away. So they look down. They look at the dust. They pretend the dust is all there is. At the far end of the street, a shape darkens against the light. Not close, not yet moving. The sheriff's silhouette leans inside the doorway of his office, one shoulder to the jamb, hat brim cutting the noon like a sundial. He does not call out. He does not posture. He does not touch the badge pinned quiet to his vest. Still, something shifts. A small, precise shift, as when a man decides to carry a secret differently. The air notices before the people do. Time lengthens a fraction, like the town is being asked to hold still long enough to tell the truth. Her cloth slows, then stops. She isn't watching him. She is listening to the space around her, the way a deer listens with skin and bone. The pump handle keeps its own counsel. Metal cool under her fingers, metal that has held every thirst in town and asked no questions. She thinks of nothing, which is how a person keeps from thinking about everything. The bucket waits. The reflection waits. The water does not lie, it only keeps the sky. A boy on a porch is learning the weight of questions. He sits on the step with a whittled stick and a pebble he has not yet thrown. His toes draw half moons in the dust, slow arcs that mean curiosity asking for permission. Children read what adults refuse to write down. He sees how the horse frets at the rail. He sees how the girl keeps wiping a clean thing clean. He sees how the grown-ups practice their blindness until it looks like order. He wants to ask why. The question lodges behind his teeth like a seed. Seeds bide their time. The day does not break. It holds. Sun on clapboard, wind on cotton, a loose shutter sighs. The church bell does not ring, but the town keeps counting anyway. To live here is to measure distance, not in miles, but in glances, not in laws, but in thresholds. There is the road in and the road out. There is the middle where you learn to carry yourself like cargo you're not sure you own. She shifts her stance a little to ease the ache in her forearms, and the small motion says more than a speech. Pain moves through the body in loops. So does endurance. The loop can be broken, not by force, by an inch. The sheriff's shadow lengthens across the packed earth, almost touching the line of sun that skims the pump's base. He remains where he is, because sometimes the first kindness is not approach, but attention. Sometimes the nervous system needs a breath's worth of distance to believe it is safe. He waits. In waiting there is a kind of respect that this town has forgotten how to practice. His stare is not a weapon, it is a door left open, quiet and visible, for as long as it takes. She dips the rag into the clear circle and wrings it out until it stops dripping. Her fingers tremble once, a small earthquake inside the bones. She steadies them against the iron, and the iron steadies her back. It is the simplest exchange, skin to texture, warmth to cool, human to object, but it is also prayer, wordless, practical, the only kind that never draws attention and always gets answered, not by heaven, but by the body agreeing to stay. The rag makes one more slow pass over the handle, and the handle needs none of it. And yet she continues, because sometimes care is a thing you do to prove to yourself that care exists. A gust lifts a veil of dust and lets it fall. The horse flicks an ear. The boy taps the pebble against the step and does not yet send it rolling. The sheriff shifts his weight a fraction. No one speaks, not to her, not about her, not within hearing. The town holds its breath the way a hand holds a match, ready to make light, ready to burn, not sure which. And in the long, still moment before anything changes, the truth stands simple and uncluttered as the pump. She has been made to wait. She has learned to endure. She is still here. Morning leans toward afternoon, and the dust forgets the shape of footsteps the way a river forgets one drop from another. The girl stands where she stood, but her breath has learned a slower rhythm, as if the ribs have finally found a little room. Heat glints off pump iron. Light wobbles on the bucket's face. Somewhere a screen door closes, the slap of wood against wood. Then the town's old hush returns, stitched with small sounds, flies trading places, leather answering the horse, a loose hinge whispering its complaint and falling quiet again, a tin cup of water placed near her boot without a word. Not charity, not pity, just left there, as if it had always been part of the dust. No hand lingers, no throat clears to be noticed. The cup arrives like shade that didn't ask permission from the sun. She doesn't reach for it, not yet. The body, taught by years of alarm, wants proof more than promise. Safety is not a word, it is a pattern. The nervous system waits to see if the pattern will hold, so she lets the cup be. She lets it belong to the ground for a while, as if belonging were a test she has learned to watch from a distance. The sheriff's glance meeting hers in passing. No nod, no greeting, only the faintest slowing of his step. It is almost nothing, almost the kind of movement a stranger might miss, but her spine knows the difference between being measured and being met. In that brief shared line of sight, two breaths find a similar pace. Co-regulation. This is what the quiet sciences would call it, the way one steady pulse lets another borrow its map. To her it is simpler, the feeling of not bracing for impact for half a second longer than usual. The feeling holds. Then it's gone, as gentle as it came, leaving a small echo where panic used to echo louder. She studies the cup the way you study a door from across the room. The rim is nicked. The handle has known hot hands and cold creek water. A ring of damp darkens the dust beneath it, a small halo that will soon disappear back into the earth. Some gifts arrive like demands. This is not one of them. It makes no noise about itself. It waits. The way kindness waits when it refuses to be a performance. She could drink. She could leave it. For now, she chooses to let it sit. Proof that patience is also a kind of courage. A boy watching from the porch, his curious eyes asking questions he knows he shouldn't speak aloud. He pinches the whittled stick between thumb and forefinger, not carving now, just holding, as if he could carve quiet into shape. He watches the cup, then the girl, then the man in the hat. Something in him loosens that he didn't know was tight. He does not yet have the words for why. He only knows that today looks a little different than yesterday, and the part of his chest that wants stories to end kinder than they begin leans forward, listening. Wind folds and unfolds the edge of her skirt. The horse breathes in a way that almost sounds like a thought. She touches the rag to the pump again and doesn't move it, just feels the iron, the cool that lives there, even in noonlight. A memory rises and passes, the tin rattle of a cup in another town, a hand that took more than it gave, a sermon that found her and left without lifting anything. The memory does not anchor, it drifts. What remains is this, a cup, unclaimed by anyone's pride, keeping its promise with no witness but dust. He crosses the street with no hurry, a line from sunlight to shade, from one side of a day to the other. His boots do not challenge the dirt, they accept it. When he reaches the mercantile's awning, he stops again, not to watch her, not to be seen, but to make space with his very stillness. The town is fluent in threats that wear smiles. It stumbles with gentleness that refuses to announce itself. Even the porch boards seem to listen for a tone that never turns into a command. The pause becomes a shelter big enough for a breath. She lets her shoulders drop a fraction, a motion so small a passerby would call it nothing. But inside everything notices. Muscles lengthen by a thread, jaw unclenches by a tooth. The body keeps score, yes, but it also keeps score when mercy comes. She considers the cup again. This time she crouches, not all the way down, just enough to place 2 fingers on the tin to feel if someone else's heat still lives there. It has cooled. It is hers to lift if she chooses. She does not lift it. She stands again, and the refusal is not defiance. It is pacing. A promise to herself that choices can be made on her timing. The boy's heel nudges his pebble forward. A practice roll. He catches it under his arch before it runs away. He grins, the small private kind, and looks down fast as if happiness were a secret he could spoil by letting it see him. He knows he will remember this exact light, this exact hush, the way the town's gaze seems to soften without daring to admit it. He knows without knowing that change rarely kicks the door. It often sets down a cup and leaves. Behind the glass, jars of penny sweets and dull nails keep their watch. Behind the church's shut door, air holds the smell of past prayers, like old wood holds smoke. Out here the world reduces to 3 points: girl, cup, man. A triangle steady enough to build an hour on, or a future. She brushes dust from her palm and leaves a pale print on her skirt. He tilts his hat back the smallest degree and looks at the sky as if measuring the weather that lives between people. The boy presses the pebble to the warm board and feels its roundness as proof he is real. No speech breaks the moment. No headline forms. A simple thing sits beside a complicated life and refuses to explain itself. In time, the sun will drift. The shadow will move. The cup will either be empty or it won't, and the day will carry on pretending to be ordinary. But something invisible has leaned closer and stayed. Later, if anyone asks why the street felt changed, there will be no answer that satisfies. Only this memory, a cup near a boot, a glance that did not take, a child learning that gentleness can be set down like water and left to be chosen. In the back room of the general store, where flour dust turns light into weather and the scales complain from habit more than from weight, talk collects like grit in a hinge and makes every movement harder. Tongues keep busy so hearts do not have to. A barrel of coffee beans breathes out a dark perfume. A jar of stick candy keeps watch over a ledger that remembers every debt but none of the reasons. Between burlap sacks and a stack of dry goods, breath leans close to breath and shapes itself into small, sharp things that pass for certainty. Rumors about her mother whispered in the back of the general store, half-truths salted with venom. The words come dressed as concern, but they travel like nettles. Someone laughs softly. Not with humor, but with relief, because it feels easier to bruise a name than to touch the ache behind it. The room warms from bodies and cools from judgment. The story bends to fit the teller and never once asks permission from the truth. Out on the street, the girl moves as if the ground might shift if she steps too hard, as if her weight could wake something sleeping under the boards. She has learned to be light the way a deer is light, not to be pretty, but to survive. Her face is a careful mask, not to deceive, but to keep her bones from spilling grief in front of those who would call it proof. The town knows pieces and pretends they are the whole. A surname mispronounced, a birthplace guessed at, a memory half heard through a door that never belonged to her. Gossip eats details and spits out certainty. The body hears all of it. The nervous system takes notes like a clerk no one sees, breath tight, pulse quick, shoulders guarding the heart's doorway. It is not her fault that her mother's shadow comes and goes like weather. It is not her fault that some people pray for rain and curse the mud that follows. It is not her fault, and still her cells carry the weight like a pack. Across town, a small office lives in cool shade. There is dust on the sill, where a finger could write a single word and mean 1,000. Inside, the sheriff sits with the patience of a man measuring something that cannot be measured with inches. The desk bears rings from coffee cups and a few scratches that kept their story. Pencil, margin, edge. He opens his ledger to a page that looks like any other until it doesn't. A ledger in the sheriff's desk with her name in the margin. No one else knows why it's there. It isn't evidence. It isn't pity. It is a line drawn, so the heart will not forget its own instructions. He does not circle the name. He does not underline it. He lets it rest where his eye will find it when doubt comes asking to be believed. His jaw works once, as if chewing a thought he does not plan to say out loud. Silence can be a weapon. Silence can be a shelter. Today it is a promise to keep watch. The church sits on its small rise like a ship that ran aground and never learned how to sail again. White paint flakes in curls that look like petals dropped and never swept. On Sundays, the bell calls everyone by the same name and then divides them by where they sit. The girl times her errands to the hours when the steps are empty, the way she avoids the church steps. Not from lack of faith, but because the pews have long turned their backs. Faith for her is not a building but a way of carrying water without spilling yourself. She believes in the kind of prayer that keeps bread from burning and fever from taking a child. She believes in the way a hand can hover over a frightened horse and teach it not to fear its own breath. If heaven needs more from her, it can find her by the pump, by the well, by the work that steadies a person from the inside out. Inside the store, the whispers roll on, always hungry for the next small wound they can salt. The words reach the doorway and thin out in the sunlight, but not before scratching a mark along the day's edge. She feels it in the prickle between shoulder blades, in the urge to shrink her height by half an inch. She does not break pace. She smooths the front of her dress with a palm that remembers other fronts, other rooms, other seasons, when she learned that attention can be soft or sharp and often arrives sharpened. Repetition steadies her. Breathe, step, notice, release. The mind wants to argue. The body wants to survive. She lets the body lead. Not today, she tells the tremor without moving her lips. Not today. The sheriff closes the ledger and rests his hand on the cover, fingers spread as if checking the heartbeat of the wood. Some choices are loud and clean, others are quiet and threaded through a dozen other movements. He thinks of the town's appetite for simple stories, how it chews complexity down to a slogan and calls it dinner. He thinks of the girl at the pump who cleans what is already clean, because cleanliness is the last thing that doesn't ask for proof. He looks at the door, at the slice of street framed like a photograph he didn't ask to keep, and breathes once, slow and deep, to reset his own rhythm. The nervous system listens to leaders whether we want it to or not. He will try to be careful with the air. There are days when the church bell's silence says more than its ringing. There are days when the store's backroom sounds like a courtroom without a judge, just jurors determined to go home early. There are days when a name in a margin weighs more than the badge above it. Today is one of those days. The girl pauses at the foot of the church steps to retie a loosened lace. Her fingers move with the small competence of someone who has taught herself 100 little rescues. She does not climb. She does not flee. She finishes the knot, tests it, and walks on, giving the building the same courtesy she gives the wind. Acknowledgement without surrender. By evening, the rumors lose their edge and settle into that low, familiar hum the town mistakes for peace. The store shutters. The bell rope sleeps. The office lamp makes a pond of yellow on paper and varnish. He reopens the ledger, as if to check a figure, and instead finds the margin that anchors his attention to what matters. Her name, simple as rain. He closes the book again. Some prayers are one-word prayers, some safeties are one-line safeties. Outside, the sky turns the color of old copper, and the street loosens its grip on the day. Memory will remember what it wants. The heart, if guided, will remember what it must. Late light stains the saloon's bat-wing doors the color of old tobacco. Laughter thins out near the threshold, as if it knows better than to step into the street. Men lean in the shadow, where heat can't quite reach. Bottles clink and go still. The girl keeps to the near side of the pump, the tin cup a quiet moon at her feet, the world holding its breath in that way towns do when they decide to test what they think they know. A cattle trader at the saloon door, staring too long. His look less about beauty than about ownership. He does not blink. His mouth tilts like a scale that already chose its weight. He measures not her face, not her posture, but the space he could take if no one said otherwise. There is a grammar to that kind of gaze. It begins with entitlement and ends with erasure. The body understands before the mind finds words. Her stomach tightens first, then her throat, then the thin muscles along the jaw that have learned to make distance without moving at all. In the nervous system, memory is a road even when the sign has fallen down. He shifts his boot off the door jamb like a man preparing to claim a piece of floor, a slice of air, a story not his. The light finds his spurs and makes small knives of them. A fly circles his hat brim and then hers, and for a second the entire street is only that sound, tiny wings insisting on the fact of being alive. She steadies her breath against it. She keeps her hands visible, empty, disciplined by 1,000 small calculations learned the hard way. Not to look away with fear, not to look straight on and call it a challenge, not to move first and be accused of moving wrong. The hymn of survival has many verses. She knows most by heart. The sheriff's quiet interruption. Just a step closer, nothing more, but enough to end the gaze. No hand on a holster, no clearing of the throat. He enters the space between without borrowing the air, as if simply remembering the street belongs to everyone changes the math. That step is a boundary drawn in plain sight. That step tells the lizard brain in every witness that a different pattern is possible. The trader's jaw works and loosens. The angle of his shoulders drops a degree, then two. He glances past the sheriff to the crowd behind glass and finds no help there, only his own reflection faint as a rumor. Her eyes lower by choice, not surrender. The heat in her cheeks is not shame, it is circulation returning to places fear had dimmed. The body does this when it senses a door where a wall used to be. Blood remembers the map home. Shoulders release the fraction they can. Breath lengthens by half a count. Safe enough for now, the nervous system says in a dialect of pulse and muscle that no one can overhear. A horse snorts at the rail like a punctuation mark that finally found its sentence. The trader laughs without teeth and lifts both palms in a theater of innocence. He tells the air a joke it refuses to carry. He leans back into the doorway he came from and tries to wear the shadow-like armor. But the moment has moved past him. Nothing dramatic. No words, no verdict. Just the town's attention sliding off his shape to settle on the space between girl and sheriff, as if the street itself prefers steadiness to spectacle. He shrugs. He disappears into the noise that wanted him all along. The girl's hands tightening on the hem of her dress. Not fear exactly, but the memory of it. Cloth gathers, knuckles pale. The gesture is small and exact, a ledger entry her muscles make because once, somewhere, the world taught them to hold on. She loosens her grip one finger at a time, as if untying a story in slow motion. The fabric falls back into place. Her palm lingers at her thigh to feel skin and cotton, proof that both are real. Neuroscience would call it grounding, she calls it continuing. From the porch the boy watches without the permission of language. He has never learned the word for trespass that leaves no bruise. He has not studied how the sympathetic system races and the parasympathetic begs it to sit down. He only knows a feeling like the end of a fever, how a room can cool when someone chooses sturdiness over show. He presses his pebble into the wood grain and leaves a small round print of dust, a child's signature on a day that will change him in ways he does not need to name. Silence retakes the street, not the brittle kind, but the sturdy kind that can hold weight. The sheriff does not congratulate himself. He does not look to see if anyone is watching. A boundary is not a performance. It is a promise kept in public. He tips his hat 1 degree, not at her, not at the trader's absence, but at the ordinary afternoon he intends to give back to itself. His step retreats a half pace, enough to return ownership of the moment to the person who was almost written out of it. She lets her hands rest against her sides, palms open, chest unlocked by a whisper. The tin cup catches a thin ribbon of sun and throws it against the pump. The light wavers and holds. Even a healed place can twinge when weather shifts. She knows this. There will be other doorways, other gazes that take without touching. But inside the circuitry of habit, a new thread has been woven. A step, a pause, a line gently kept. The body will remember. The next time the fear will rise a little later, leave a little sooner. Wind lifts grit to the height of ankles and lets it sink. Someone inside the saloon finds a tune on a mouth harp and loses it again. The trader's laughter tries once more to find its footing and doesn't. Across the avenue, the church window throws a dull square of light that looks almost like blessing if you squint. From somewhere north, a smear of cloud begins to gather itself into a thought. The horse stamps twice as if counting. The boy finally releases his pebble and watches it roll an easy arc before it sleeps. Nothing grand has happened, and yet everything has tilted, a fraction only, toward a different center. Afternoon tilts, and the color of the day goes from brass to bruised. Heat loosens its grip on the boards, and the wind that had only been a rumor begins to gather its names. First, it lifts paper, then grit, then the breath at the front of the mouth. Shadows blur at the edges. Animals feel it before the people do. The gelding's ears tack east, the stray dog curls tight under the steps, a chicken hustles without dignity toward anywhere that has a wall, a dust devil scouts the far end of town and disappears like a thought someone chose not to finish, a dust storm rolling over the mesa, swallowing the horizon. The line where earth meets sky becomes a smear the color of old bread, and the sun looks like a coin about to be pocketed by a hand no one can see. She is at the well because water is the last thing that makes sense when nothing else will. The barrels wait open-mouthed, ringed with rope and canvas. Wind hits the lip of the well and sings a dry note. Grit settles on her lashes, and she blinks it away, steady, practiced, the way someone blinks away a memory that would only slow the hands. She wrestles the tarp as if it were something alive, not slip. Canvas slaps her forearms with its rough blessing. She thinks only in actions. Pull, cross, tie, tighten. The mind wants drama. The body wants a lid. The sheriff, finding her at the well, struggling to cover the barrels, his hand over hers on the rope. Not possession, not rescue, just weight where weight is needed, warmth where friction has chewed the skin. For a fraction, her fingers brace against his, the way a beam braces against a beam. 2 grips, 1 task. Wind tries to take the tarp like debt collecting a late payment. They lean into it together, and the rope answers with a song of fibers under strain. No words, because words would only get sand in them. No orders, because order is already present in the way their hands learn the same rhythm. Pull, wrap, tie, test, again. The first wall of dust arrives like a crowd without faces. It eats distance, then color, then most of the sky. Sand finds the seams of everything. Eyes, ears, collars, conscience. She coughs, not loud, and tucks her mouth into the crook of her elbow. He shifts, placing his shoulder between her and the worst of it, and the gesture is simple as the angle of a roof. Canvas drops, knots hold. They gather the last coil, and he ties it down with a farmer's knot that means exactly what it says. Stay. She nods, a small consent to the work they have done. The nervous system acknowledges in its own language. Less fear, more breath. Not safe, but safer. Gusts lift grit to the height of memory. They run for the lee of the tool shed, then change their minds. The roof flaps like a bird about to fail. The church door blows open and closes on empty pews. The saloon sign slaps the wall and learns manners. Visibility shrinks to arm's length, and then to the width of 2 shoulders. He spreads the wool blanket with one snap that disappears in the roar and creates a pocket of world where sound is thick and close. A brief shelter under the same blanket. The wind too loud to hear each other breathe. The fabric whistles. The corner ropes bite at their wrists. Sand needles any skin that asks for air. They crouch near the barrels, back to back for a moment, then side by side because the gusts insist on angles that make more sense. Blanket edges thrum against the staves like a heartbeat exaggerated by a stethoscope. Inside the small dark, time changes shape. Seconds swell and learn patience. She stares at the weave, inches from her nose, and sees tiny ladders of wool, every rung worn by other storms, other afternoons when someone needed a temporary sky. He counts 4, 5, 6, then stops counting and listens instead for the way the wind keeps a rhythm even when it sounds like chaos. In another life, a class might call this co-regulation. Here it is simply 2 bodies deciding not to panic at the same time. His shoulder is a line, her breath is a measure. Together they make a paragraph long enough for weather to pass through. Sand finds its way between teeth. The taste is not pleasant, but it is honest. She presses her palm to the barrel to feel the low drum of the gale and lets that steady percussion replace the old drum of dread. A rope end snaps her knuckles. She holds the sting and watches it shrink to its size. Pain tells the truth about scale. Not all of it is old. Not all of it is forever. He shifts again, not touching, yet near enough that heat moves from one sleeve to the other, like a word traded by friends who don't need to speak. Under the blanket, the world smells of wool, sweat, wet rope, and the faint mineral of water waiting below ground. The storm speaks every tongue at once. Howl, hiss, thud, rasp, and none of those tongues can say her name the way it deserves to be said. She closes her eyes and sees the pump handle as a small cross against an empty field. She opens them and sees only weave and grit and the ghost of her own breath fogging and vanishing. The heart slows, then steadies. The hands relax a fraction and remember how to be hands, not hooks. He raises the edge of the blanket an inch, checks the color of the air and drops it again. Eye to weather, weather to eye. Not yet, the gesture says, and she hears it without hearing. Outside, shutters bang in a rhythm that would be funny if it weren't happening to Holmes. The gelding squeals once, then quiets, clever head turned away from the sting. Somewhere a window gives up with a shatter like thin ice. The day sheds pieces of itself, and will put them back in a way that will not look exactly the same. Storms reorganize more than clouds. They reorder what a town reaches for first. Minutes or hours, the measure blurs. The first wall passes. Less soldier now, more tired uncle. The roar steps down one rung, then another. The blanket settles, then lifts, then settles. He gives her a nod and raises a corner to let a stripe of light through. Air comes in, tasting new and old at once. She coughs again, softer. They step out together into a world drawn in sepia. Dust coats the pump, the cup, the lashes of the boy now peering from his porch like a shipwrecked survivor spotting shore. The town is there, altered by a film of the very earth it stands on, and perhaps a little truer for being seen through it. She checks the knots with fingers that know what failure looks like and don't trust it today. He tests the hoops along the barrel tops and finds them still true. The well rope creaks in a lower register. satisfied with its own endurance. They share a look that is not triumph and not relief exactly, more the sober accounting of two people who lent their steadiness to a difficult hour and got some steadiness back. In the ledger no one sees, a line moves from deficit toward enough. The sun returns as a pale coin, wind burns itself into a memory and quiets. Grit settles in the corners like small promises of later sweeping. The blanket, now heavy with dust, sags between their hands. They lift it together and shake out what can be shaken. Sand rains down with the gentlest applause a storm can give the living. He folds the wool in halves and then quarters. She folds the last quarter into place. The map of the afternoon remains in their muscles. Reach, brace, hold, release. The next weather will come when it comes. The body has learned a new route through it. At the edge of town, the horizon finds its line again. The boy rolls his pebble in a clean arc and grins like someone who has watched proof arrive. The gelding blows, long and relieved. The tin cup wears a new film, but keeps its shine under it. Stubborn, faithful, she wipes her brow with the back of her wrist and leaves a clean streak that looks like a path. He adjusts his hat and scans the street not for danger, but for return. Under their feet, the ground hums the old, quiet song it hums after every trouble. Still here, still here, still here. Late afternoon turns the mercantile windows into mirrors, and for a breath the town has to look at itself. Heat has washed away the storm's edge, but the air hasn't forgotten. It holds a fine grit that makes every swallow deliberate. The door's bell gives a thin, tired ring, and then surrenders to the weight of bodies. Women with lists and guarded eyes, men with pockets that jingle enough to sound important. Behind the counter, paper wraps around sugar and nails with the same crisp sound. Outside, a horse stamps once as if calling roll. She stands near the end of the queue, not holding anything, as if touching an object might imply a claim she isn't allowed to make. The floorboards know each boot by heart. They complain under the trader, flatter themselves under the preacher. Hold steady under a boy who came only for a length of twine he will tie into something that looks like a game. She keeps her hands in sight, palms smoothed along the tired fabric of her skirt. A whisper moves through the room that isn't words, just the old appetite waking up, the one that feeds on someone else's place in line. The clerk glances past her and over her, the way you look through a window when you want the view to change. Somewhere a jar settles back into itself with a click, like a small verdict rendered without a judge. He enters without ceremony. The sheriff carries the day's light in with him, a rectangle of sun folding across the threshold and sliding to rest against the counter leg. He removes his hat and leaves the dust where it belongs, on the floor, not on anyone's name. The badge lies quiet against his vest, a circle that glints only when the room blinks. He doesn't clear his throat. He doesn't touch the brim. He steps into the space between her and the place where the town's attention gathers when it's looking for a lesson it won't have to learn. The clerk stills. The bell rope stirs in a wind that isn't there. The sheriff calling her daughter in front of the mercantile crowd. The word lands without flourish, a single stone placed exactly where a bridge always should have been. It does not rise to meet the room. It does not ask permission. It chooses its place and sits. The syllables are plain and whole, the kind that the body understands before the mind translates. For a heartbeat nothing moves, and then everything moves differently. Patterns rewrite themselves without noise, the air tightening like a gun being cocked. No one moves, no one speaks. There is a collective flinch that never completes. It freezes halfway, like a fist remembering it was once a hand. A sack of flour settles in the clerk's arms with a soft thud. The trader's tongue makes a dry pass over his teeth and does not find a story worth chewing. The preacher's gaze catches the light and holds it, not as authority, but as a man discovering how much dust lives in a room when the sun tells the truth. Even the door seems to brace itself for a slam that doesn't come. The town has heard every kind of claim, property, debt, sin, but this one is older than all three. You belong. Her face unreadable, but her shoulders straighter than they've ever been. The change is not theater. It is anatomy choosing trust over collapse. Clavicles lift the way a bird tests the hinge of its own wings. Breath travels further down the spine. Heat rises in her chest and does not turn to panic. It turns to presence. She does not smile. She does not cry. She lets the word find a home between bone and memory, and there it settles, making a small, stubborn light in a place that had learned to live dark. The clerk shifts the paper to his other hand and finds her eyes for the first time without trying to measure what he is owed. He nods, a fraction, the tiniest currency a man can pay when he realizes he has undercounted a person. The boy with the twine stops pretending not to watch. He will tell this hour back to himself later. at the pump or the fence or in his bed under a thin quilt, trying to name the feeling of a room changing shape without breaking anything. The nervous systems in that store, dozens of them, edge away from alarm inch by inch, as if the word itself were laying down new floorboards. He does not repeat it. Once is enough. He does not touch her shoulder or the air around it. The claim requires no proof beyond the saying and no echo beyond the first clear sound. He shifts his weight to the other foot and stands there, not as shield, not as threat, but as witness to his own sentence. A witness is a kind of shelter when a life has been weather. The badge glints again and goes quiet. A son caught and released. A coin rings against glass somewhere in the back, and the sound lands like punctuation on the end of a chapter the town didn't know it was writing. She steps forward one pace because the line has opened. The clerk sets down the flower and sets down too, a small habit of pretending not to see. He asks what she needs, and the question is so ordinary it feels like rain after a long dust season. Nothing dramatic, just water doing the only work water knows how to do. She names a thing no one can object to. Salt. The word leaves her mouth clean, unhurried, belonging to the air as much as to her. He measures, he wraps, he ties the string with care that looks like practice for something better. Outside, the light has shifted in that quiet way afternoons shift when they prepare for evening. Longer shadows, softer edges, a sky that turns the color of forgiveness without saying the word. The door opens, and the room breathes again on a new cadence. Some faces soften, some harden. All of them have heard. The sermon this week will sound different, and no one will know why. The trader will drink and try a joke that used to land and does not. The boy will keep the twine and tie it around a pebble to see how far a small thing can be swung by a steady hand. A bell that didn't ring will ring in someone's chest hours later, a delayed chime finding its metal. They leave the mercantile not together, not apart, just aligned in the thin, precise way two people can be when a word has done its work. The street does not bow. The sky does not split. The tin cup at the pump catches one last sliver of day and returns it bright and exact to anyone willing to look. The town has a new absence where an old argument used to be. It will take time for the absence to feel like peace. It will take longer for peace to feel ordinary. For now, a word, a room, a spine, a door that did not slam. Morning arrives rinsed and thinner, the kind that makes shadows seem newly drawn. Dust has settled into the seams of everything, softening edges as if the town were made of memory. The pump handle wears a pale film, the tin cup a dull ring where sunlight tries again. She steps onto the street with the same careful measure she has always used, and yet the ground answers differently, a half note higher, as if the earth has adjusted its ear. People stepping aside for her in the street the next day. Not kindness, not yet, just space. The shift is quiet but unmistakable, a current opening in a crowded river. Bodies selecting a wider arc without quite knowing they have chosen. Her breath eases one rib's width lower. Muscle listens for threat, and hears only the ordinary sounds of a life returning to itself. She feels the edges of this space, the way you test the fit of a borrowed coat. Shoulders, sleeves, the reach of the arms before the cloth resists. Space can be mercy. Space can be another kind of fence. Today it is neither and both, a corridor that invites and guards in the same breath. She moves through it without haste, the soles of her boots telling her what the mind already suspects. Patterns do not break like glass. They unlearn themselves, one step at a time. A dog trots ahead and glances back for approval he does not need. The horse at the rail, less restless than yesterday, noses a knot for the simple pleasure of being allowed to stay. On a porch, a woman pauses with her bread and decides to hold it a touch looser, as if the loaf itself were heavy with something that might be shared. The church door stands open, though the air is not yet full of hymns. Light lies across the steps in long rectangles, clean and unclaimed, the preacher offering a nod from the church steps, the smallest breach in the wall. It is a nod shaped like a hinge, learning to move again after rust. He does not beckon, he does not bless. He softens the face that so often has been set. The nod travels farther than it looks, past collar and bone into a place inside her that remembers how doorways can close without a latch and open without a key. Her eyes answer with the barest tilt. Not gratitude, not refusal. Recognition, maybe, of a man trying to change inside his own skin. Between them, the stairs hold steady, old wood that has borne the weight of weddings and warnings, funerals and first Sundays. She doesn't climb. She doesn't detour. She passes, and the air in that small rectangle of shade cools as if relieved not to be carrying tension alone. Somewhere within the nave, a broom leans against a pew, bristles spread, a tool waiting for a hand. Faith is an action before it is a noun. The mind knows this by doctrine, the body by practice. Her faith today is the shape of her stride, even, unbroken, aligned with itself. At the mercantile window, reflections gather, tin glass faces caught between outside and in. A man who laughed too easily yesterday now studies the seam of his hat brim, and for once the hat gives him no answer. Two girls, hair ribboned with thrift, whisper in a softer key, curiosity braided with the cautious hope that stories can bend. Close by, the clerk sweeps the threshold in small strokes that look less like duty and more like apology, finding a job it can do. Sweeping is a language, so is the angle of a head. So is the choice to leave silence where judgment used to sit. Not every word needs a twin. Some hours are better measured by posture. The boy from the porch has come down to the street, stick tucked through his belt like a tiny sword he will never draw. He does not hover. He drifts near enough to share the weather. The boy from the porch kicking a pebble toward her path, as if starting a game. The stone travels a short, hopeful arc and rests at the toe of her boot, patient, unafraid. She pauses, just long enough for the nervous system to mark the moment as safe, and returns it with the gentlest nudge, the kind that says neither yes nor no, but, I see you. His grin flashes and hides, a small lantern cupped from wind. The pebble makes another journey, and another, finding rhythm where talk would only tangle. The sheriff stands a half street away, not intruding on the space that has begun to belong to her day, not withdrawing from it either. He inspects a hitching post because wood needs a reason for a man to stand still. In truth, he is listening for the sound a town makes when it rearranges its furniture. The badge on his chest has not changed. The pattern of attention around it has. He notes the absence of a certain kind of laugh, the thinning of a glare that used to arrive before any facts did. These are not victories to count. They are small, durable adjustments, new grooves cut into old habits, the way water learns a better path once a stone is shifted. She passes the barbers and remembers not the sting of talk, but the slow relief under the blanket yesterday. The way a rough weave can be a roof if two people agree to hold it. The memory does not sharpen, it steadies. This is how the brain rewires after fear. Repetition, safety, breath that finds its way to the belly and stays long enough to teach the heart a slower song. She lets the breath fill its home. The body accepts the lesson. The lesson spreads the way light spreads, not fast, not loud, simply present in more places than before. A woman steps aside with her basket and offers nothing but room, and room is not nothing. A man removes his hat not as courtship, not as pity, but as if air itself had asked him to be polite. Voices find a lower register. Boots create a tempo that does not hurry her past the pump where the tin cup hangs now like a small flag from nobody to everyone. She doesn't reach for it. She doesn't pretend it isn't there. She lets its presence say what it says. Some things once set down choose to stay, and the staying changes the weather in a radius bigger than the object itself. By midday the heat climbs, and the street sweats out the last of the storm. Children begin the quiet commerce of pebbles and chalk lines. A wagon wheel complains less than usual. The preacher has left the steps, but left his nod behind, as if a gesture could echo. The boys' pebble games travel in widening circles that avoid feet without having to be told. She turns a corner, and the space follows. Not clinging, not crowding, simply continuing like a thought that has discovered it is true. What remains is not proof and not prophecy. It is quieter. A shift in baseline, a recalibration felt at the level of blink and swallow, and the length a person can look at the sky without flinching. The town will forget and remember and forget again. That is what towns do. But today, streets make room without a fight. Doors consider staying open. Steps hold light. She moves through all of it with the steady grace of someone whose outline has finally stopped being erased. And somewhere inside, the smallest part of her that kept watch for ruin lets its shoulders drop and whispers a sentence the body understands first. It might hold. Evening gentles the hard lines of the town, and the day unclenches by degrees. In the small kitchen that smells of iron skillet and old pine, lamplight softens edges the sun left sharp. A shared meal in the sheriff's kitchen, both eating slowly, as if the food might vanish if rushed. Spoons lift and return without hurry, the clock forgetting to count for a while. Steam from the pot rises like a quiet benediction and fades into the rafters. Their breathing learns the same tempo, that unshowy rhythm two lives can find when the body is finally allowed to stop guarding every doorway at once. Taste is fuller when fear sits down. Warmth travels hand to chest to spine, the nervous system placing this night where it belongs, filed under enough. The room is plain, mostly wood and the labor of hands. The tin cup from the first day now hanging on a nail by the door. It winks when the lamplight tilts, not asking to be noticed, only proving that objects remember. A simple arc from ground to nail, from offering to home. What began at a boot in dust now keeps its watch where arrivals and departures pass. The cup has no speech, and needs none. It is a small, accurate map of how something can be set down and stay. They clear the bowls with the economy of people who have never been paid for wasting motion. He lays his coat across the table, a tear near the shoulder where storms and years have made their case. The girl mending a tear in his coat while he sharpens his knife, neither looking at the other but both aware. Stitch, pull, knot, stone, draw, lift. The scrape of metal down the blade is steady as breath. The thread hums against cloth like a remembered hymn. In the pause between strokes and stitches, something unspoken steps into the chair between them and rests its elbows on the table as if it has finally been invited. Not a claim, not a bargain. Presence, practice, the hard-won ease of two people making use of the same silence. Outside, the street remains the same, but inside something unclaimed has found a place to rest. Hooves ring low on packed earth. A sign taps once and then behaves. Beyond the window, the same storefronts wear the same rough paint, and yet the distance between buildings has learned a softer name. He sets the knife aside and turns the whetstone in his palm as if weighing a word he does not need to say. She bites the thread and smooths the seam, then presses her thumb along the mend the way a person checks a heartbeat. There is no ceremony to it, no witnesses, only a room returning itself to the ones who chose to stay. The wind carrying dust through the open window, like a reminder that nothing is truly settled, only carried forward. It lifts the gingham curtain and leaves a pale veil across the stove, the table, the cup on its nail. Dust writes its patient script on everything that matters, and the script is simple. Keep, keep, keep. He rises and nudges the window shut, but not all the way. Air needs a path. She gathers the bowls and lets the water find its work. Somewhere down the street, a boy tests a pebble against his shoe and grins in the dim. Somewhere up the rise, the church holds a cooler breath in the doorway than it did the day before. They do not plan tomorrow. They do not revise yesterday. The lamp burns low. The knife is sharp. The coat will hold. When he latches the door, the cup sways and settles, catching one last coin of light before the flame goes thin. In the quiet that follows, their separate hearts practice the old lesson made new: how to beat and not break, how to share a room without shrinking, how to let a name spoken once continue speaking by itself. And as the curtain lifts and falls, the room keeps time with a world that has learned, if only tonight, to breathe.